Hi, well, welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you again. This is our third committee vodcast, which is a series of conversations with our Strata committee experts about how to build effective committees. The focus of our conversations will be around the human factors rather than the legal factors of being on the committee and managing all of the day-to-day committee issues that we face. If you've got any particular questions that come up as we're discussing topics, pop them in the chat box. We may not quite get time to answer those, but we do take them all on board and then incorporate that in the next month's podcast. So please feel free to add any of your own stories as well, because they are always well worth reading. Joining us today again is Nick Abbey. Can you give a wave, Nick? And Catherine Lisa. And with experience, Nick comes from a background with large multi-layered subdivision and serving on committees in that area. And then Catherine has come from living in a number of multi-story apartment buildings and an experience of quite a few different management companies, which last week's podcast made very interesting listening to, and has been involved in many project improvements. And she has a particular passion for sustainability. Catherine is also the first lot owner to become president of SCA WA, which is something I'm very excited about. So far our conversations, we have discussed why people volunteer to be on committee, which is important to understand. What are their experience when they join and what sort of life background skills that they've got that they bring to the committee, and the important steps for a committee to do from day one, and managing your manager, which was last podcast. Recapping from that, there were 5 particular things that both Catherine and Nick raised that were important to committees being effective, and that was building relationships with the manager and the committee, creating a work plan for the year, an action list to be achieved, which is the topic we're going to cover today, having an induction pack for the committee, and one also for the strata manager, and one from the chair. So different induction packs as to how you can bring on your new committees. Creating handover from the outgoing committee to the incoming committee, so recognising that committees will change over from time to time, and how do we keep continuity, and then keeping communication open and transparent. So each one of these are ones that we're unpacking in our podcast as we go forward. So welcome back, Catherine and Nick. It's great to see you again and giving up your time to be here today.
Thank you.
So the topic, as I said, was the creating a work plan for a year, an action list to be achieved. Now, I know from our previous discussions that Nick thinks very strategically, and he will come and talk to us about that strategic thinking and how the action plan can flow from that. And also, as I mentioned, that Christine has been involved in so many of those refurbishment projects, and how the action plan related and helped her achieve the things that they needed to achieve within those projects. And from my experience working with committees, I have seen the chairperson at the first meeting of the committee just say to everybody around the table, let's make a list of what we want to achieve this year. So Nick, what is a simple action plan for a committee to start with?
There's no one size fits all, of course. And all I can offer is some reflections on what I have done, but also learned from other managers and owners corporation members in making their committees as effective as possible. And I start with this point. Time is so precious, obviously, and well-managed meetings make sure we get the most out of our time together. That's the challenge. And certainly a useful tool for committee effectiveness is an annual work plan. Less is more, the KISS principle, keep it simple. that provides an outline of the year ahead. It may also ensure that time is given, attention is given to the things that matter most, but which can be overlooked, of course. If our work is too reactive, we have a monthly meeting cycle and we turn up to meetings and we're responding to things, and then we think that, well, once again, perhaps the urgent has driven out the important, and we might look at that later on in the year. The other thing also, of course, it's good practice, but it varies enormously. I've seen managers prepare work plans. I've seen committees prepare work plans. I've seen, perhaps ideally in my view, the chairperson of the committee and the manager, they may do a first draft of the work plan. And when I say a draft, again, it's not an academic document. It might just be some dot points, but it's the basis of a conversation for the committee as to what it really wants to do and achieve over the course of the year. I also make this point that there is still a reluctance in many committees to develop a proper work plan, and maybe in part because we don't always appreciate that the work of a committee is different from that of a manager. In this regard, some OC committees, some owners corporation committees can be more focused, of course, on the manager's operational actions and they're responding to these. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a model that works well for many owners corporations, rather than the goals or things that they all want to achieve. So they're saying, as a committee member and a manager, what will be different 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now, because of our work and our efforts. Another thing, we never overfill the plan with things so that there is no provision for contingencies. Allow time, obviously, for the unexpected. So do you want me to quickly go through my little 10-point checklist?
Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go. Point 1, meeting dates for the year, including, if relevant, their locations, or if alternating between face-to-face and online, including subcommittee or working group meetings, depending on the size of the owners corporation. So we obviously start with that. The second point, any issues, concerns, problems that the committee needs to or would like to address or resolve during the year. Significant matters that might need to be considered, such as a maintenance plan or a safety audit issue that should be reviewed and progressed. And these types of issues are not always just operational issues, of course. They can be bigger picture issues as to what the owners corporation wants to achieve. And obviously, as I said before, neither the committee nor the manager will obviously know all of the issues that emerge during the year. So some of the things could be included in the plan as they arise. Number 3, I love focus items. I love planning ahead and saying, look, maybe a couple of times during the year, we'll have a more in-depth conversation about something in particular. And it might be a specific goal in our strategic plan, or simply a key aim or an objective or a priority that was agreed to at the previous AGM or identified through our community survey. So it might be just something very simple and basic. It might be something more strategic by way of a goal. But we're going to talk about that, and therefore we'll make time for that at our meeting in May or our meeting in October to do a deeper dive into that. Number 4, obviously the approval of the budget and all other financial matters as recurring themes, so that we're trying to be as strategic as possible about finances. We're not just hearing reports, we're also making space on our meeting agenda in the months ahead for the financial things that we want to really focus on. Number 5, obviously spending some time on preparing an annual report. And for a large owners corporation, that might be quite a big document. For a small corporation, that might just be some dot points. These are the things that we achieved and that were completed. And that can be something done by both the manager and the committee, of course. Number 6, a bit of a review or a stock take, keeping it simple, but of how the committee, the manager and lot owners relate to each other and how they communicate. I think, once a year, it's good to have a bit of a conversation about how are we all traveling together, how are we engaging each other, including lot owners. How are lot owners engaging the manager? What does the manager have to say about that? And how is the committee likewise in working with the manager and communicating with lot owners? Number 7, in our little checklist, again, not all of these things were relevant to every owners corporation committee, but the dates and topics of any management or committee member or lot owner presentations during the year. I'm a great lover of presentations, including it might be a lot owner who has expertise in some issue to do with the common property or with the work of the committee or a particular goal, or it might be the manager, then it might only just be, you know, 1 or 2 presentations in the course of the year, but use the time valuably to actually bring someone in to do that. Number 7, dates and topics of any, I've already mentioned that. Number 8, particulars of any guests. For example, a local councillor who may be invited to meetings during the year. You know, it's another way of reaching out and not being a secret society, but engaging others who may have some value to add to the work of your owners corporation. So, you know, for example, a local councillor who may be invited to speak about something, or to be, you know, just to be part of the committee meeting or a particular item on the agenda. Number 9, this is something we often overlook, and it's well worth planning for. Do we always do it? Not necessarily, but a committee and manager evaluation and self-assessment. It may simply be a conversation, you know, for a few minutes towards the end of the year, but build it into the work plan so it's not overlooked. You know, now, depending on the size of the OC, there might be a more comprehensive review, for example, of the work of the manager, you know, or it just might be a conversation for a couple of minutes. How are we travelling as a committee, and, you know, what could we improve? And number 10, another thing that's often overlooked that we can always work, you know, build into a work plan or an action plan, the details of any induction or professional development, you know, and that just might be sharing something we should all read together, or it might be something more significant than that. But again, so look, what's the point I'm making here? Look, it's a living document. It develops in response to changing priorities and needs over the year. And that's just a checklist, which I'm happy to provide as well, you know, perhaps to write that up, as the kinds of things that may be relevant in part or whole to developing an action plan, so that we're more proactive. We're thinking about the future and not just responding to the issues of the day and to what happens in the meeting cycle month by month.
Wow,
Nick, I always learn something when I listen to you, Nick, because our action plans are, you know how you said less is more, ours is more is more. So it's more, one day we actually sat down with all this butcher's paper across the wall and said, right, what do we want to get handled? And we had about, I don't know, 50 things up there. That was definitely a more is more thing. And the way that we dealt with it was we went, okay, so who's going to look after this bit? And we assigned names. And then when we realized there were chunks of work that was a little bit too big for one person, we said, right, that's an appropriate thing for a short-term action group. So we created a stag for that. But we certainly didn't do the less is more or the very strategic plan it through the year approach. We just had the heading, the people, and went, go for it, and we'll see you in a little bit. Now, I must say that scared us quite a lot, looking at the volume of what we wanted to get done. But by the time we got to the end of the year, we got about 90% of it done. So, you know, it wasn't as strategic, but it was pretty good in actually getting action happening.
And there's so many different models, obviously, you know. And when I say, you know, less is more, keep it simple, obviously we can overthink and overwork anything, you know, and we don't want to deter people from attending committee meetings because they think, oh God, this is such a laborious agenda ahead of us. But what you've suggested sounds so powerful, because like that's actually a strategic agenda that's different to more of a very practical action list.
Yeah, but I like your inductions is good. The best we got was, let's do a walk around the building and I'll show you where the plant room is. We didn't get a sort of the way we do things around here, or this is the manager, or we didn't get any of that. So yeah, no, that's particularly powerful. And we've got an AGM coming up, so I'm going to suggest that we do an induction.
So Catherine, you mentioned in there working groups, you know, that you identified that you had so many tasks and that some of those tasks could be grouped and then given to a working group, which so how, I mean, that using working groups is an effective way of delegating those tasks. How did you have that in place? How did they report back to you, and was it all effective?
It was amazing, actually. We just put up notices in the lift and said, right, we're getting a green working group together. Who's interested? And people that we've never ever seen at a meeting before popped up, you know. And then we did a gardening working group, and then we did a interior upgrade working group, and you know, these are obviously projects that are much bigger than one person. And so when we did that, the people that came to light and got involved in their community were quite, it's amazing. We never see these people at meetings. They never really participate, but when you've got their topic, they're into it. It's wonderful.
Yes, and that is the key to it, of course, isn't it? That's the WIFM, you know, always there's something in it and for them, and yeah, they can see the benefit.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that when Nick was saying having presentations, because one of the things that we are all facing is a tsunami of electric vehicle charging coming towards us. And there's got to be somebody in our owners corporations that knows about this, who can reach out and give us a bit of a presentation, you know, because we have to really get our heads around that pretty quickly. And yeah, the knowledge in the building, when you actually talk to people, it's quite remarkable.
Yes, it is. I agree. And you know, and like us, like they'll have passions about particular areas, and that's very useful. Nick, you found the same thing in your journey, that you've got different people who popped up to be involved in different projects that weren't necessarily putting their hand up for committee?
Absolutely. And look, as we know, has there been a decline in many organisations and communities in membership of committees? Perhaps over many decades. However, are there other ways of involving people in working groups or doing a presentation to a committee and then they end up leading something? Like the example that Catherine gave is a perfect example. You know, being proactive and thinking about, well, who has the expertise in our community who may be able to advise us on this, and may be able to even put together a practical plan, you know, that will benefit all lot owners. It's just amazing. Look, it's a paradox in some ways, but why we still overlook the expertise we have in our own community. And you know, look, I'm stating the bleeding obvious, but there is a propensity to do that. And look, some owners corporations have even had a skills register, you know, and keeping it simple again, just so that they are aware of the kinds of people who may be able to offer some advice or add some value to some work without having to be a committee member necessarily.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing that I found is some of the people who, let's say, are our biggest critics on the council, on the Council of Owners or Strata Council, once you get them involved in their topic, you find out that they just love the complex. They love the building. The reason that they're critical is that they're coming from the right place, that they want it to be better. Once you involve them in a project, then you're directing all that passion to something rather than just, you know, being an email warrior. So that's helpful too.
So Catherine, given that you've been involved with a number of buildings, was it 15 or?
Yeah, 15, I think, is the latest count.
Yeah. I mean, that's a significant amount of buildings. Did you find that this process, like this time you said you used the butcher paper and, you know, sticky notes and that kind of thing, is that something that you've used like all the way on every one of those buildings, or you had different approaches for different people? And I guess also, were you always the driver in all those 15? Were you the leader that was bringing it to the table, or were there others who were bringing it and you were a follower?
I'm often the bringer. However, sometimes I bring things and people go, no, we don't want it. So in my building where I'm living right now, I'm suggesting things and I keep getting, no, we don't do it like that. We don't do it like that. No, we don't do it. That's not the way. So, you know, at the moment, I think I'm hitting up against the Catherine's more of a nuisance than a driving force at this point. But in my other buildings, I've had a more success. This is a much bigger building than I've ever lived in. I've got 207 lots here. And they've done the way that they've done things for a long time, and there's sort of factions in the committee and things like that. So that's a little bit different. But no, in the other buildings, more or less, we didn't. The butcher's paper example was one particularly proactive building where I bought in and they went, right, Catherine's here. She's got a lot of knowledge. Let's just get all this stuff done. So I helped them, give them the confidence that they could get it done. So yeah, it usually just needs one person to just take a bit of action. Everybody knows what needs to be done. Just needs someone to get them organised and push ahead.
Yeah. So Nick, clearly what we're sort of seeing there too is that leadership and or chairing, you know, being the chair of that committee is obviously very important to have that driver. You know, what are some practical good examples of chairing?
Well, chairing and also managing, because we often see it as a collaborative relationship between the manager and the chairperson. And also I should emphasise before getting to that, that an action plan is not something that's isolated from being an effective committee. There are other things that work in your favour, obviously. And so a chair and a manager ideally are focusing on some goals in some kind of plan. You know, that might be the butcher's paper approach. You know, but whatever is done, we are establishing more proactively some priorities for the future. And that might be to do with a maintenance plan or a safety audit or a fully fledged strategic plan. The other thing about it also is that it's good for a chair and the manager to be alert to the issues in their community amongst lot owners. And we often say that there should be community surveys. Again, keeping it simple, whether it's through Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, so that we are aware of the kinds of issues that may matter and perhaps the committee hasn't been so focused on to lot owners more broadly. And of course, you know, things there could be the maintenance of common property, road safety, car parking, drainage, stormwater control, neighbourly relations, community activities, the appearance of lots, and then plans for future improvement, you know, whether it's vegetation, planting trees, community bulk purchasing, whatever. So an action plan then should really be the foundation of the strategies found in your plan, whatever your plan looks like. However big and ambitious or small and low scale your plan is, an action plan is always contributing to that. And if your action plan does not support your key priorities or strategies, there is obviously less chance that the committee will be effective. And I think there's been a recurring theme here. We focus on the responsibilities of the committee and the owners corporation as distinct from those of the manager, although obviously the two overlap, you know, like there's no big dividing line between them. And that's why it's often quite tricky, but it is a risk for many. In the absence of an action plan, the risk for many committees, they end up perhaps being too reactive, too responsive, and too focused on the operational issues raised by the manager, rather than perhaps being more strategic. And probably the only other thing I would mention is that it's really important that the role of the chairperson and the manager, that we are communicating with the community, with lot owners, about our decisions and actions, and always inviting suggestions for agenda items. Yeah. So that our action plan is not just something that's driven internally by the committee, but also there is a process there, a feedback loop, so that, you know, and I know as a chairperson, I would always have my email address and my mobile number, you know, so that I'd have a certain visibility in the community, so that anyone could contact me. In the first place, people would contact the manager, you know, if it's an operation matter, something has to be fixed, etc. But if it's something about improvement in our community and they wanted to actually run it past the chairperson, you should be so accessible, of course, as a chairperson. And that then further informs your action plan, your calendar of work for the 12 months and beyond.
It's so interesting, Nick. I just want to pick up on that thing that you said about what the manager does and what the committee does, because the manager often has all these requirements, statutory requirements and the things that they have to do. And that's how your agenda gets built in the absence of what you're saying, in the absence of the strong chairperson or a strong secretary saying, this is what we need to talk about. And sometimes in our buildings, or my previous buildings, we've had meetings without the strata manager in the room, because we're just talking about, you know, actions that they don't need to be in the room for.
Yeah. And I think that is sort of the clear message, is that the action plan in particular, that wish list of what the committee is wanting to achieve, particularly a newly formed committee, because they've come onto the committee for a reason. And yes, they have duties under the Act, which is where the manager, you know, the manager is going to fit and have a whole list of things that fit with the compliance issue. But the committee shouldn't lose focus of the wish list of why they came on, because that's the WIFM. as well. You know, the reason why they're giving up their time is to, is to either see right or wrong that they might see is wrong, to improve something, be it go down the sustainability line, or just simply build the community for that. Which is interesting, Catherine, in your 15 buildings, were any of those new buildings?
One of them, yep.
One of them. So the opportunity I see in the new building is the real importance of that first committee in building community, number one, but also kind of setting up this framework that we're talking about, that open and transparent communication, the policy about it, just simply, yes, the chairperson is accessible and here's how you get onto me. That because the tone that is set at that time is the tone and what's going to kind of get built on from, day to day, week to week, year to year. Everyone's going to, like what you're finding now, this is the way we do it. This is the way. And all of that was entrenched basically from the very start of the building. And
I agree. But it can change. It depends on a lot of things, but it can change. But yes, I agree. The way we do things around here is a very strong, entrenched thing in some buildings. Yeah.
Yeah. So that putting that effort in at that startup. I don't know, Nick, did you find that because you've been involved with Springthorpe from the get-go?
Well, yeah, like there were committees before my time, so but I think the main thing though was that we increasingly wanted to set the standards for how the committee operated, and that's always a work in progress, of course, always a work in progress. And even having an action plan, that's why it's important not to overload it. We do what's practical and manageable, because it will always improve itself. Like the action plan in year 2 will be different to the action plan in the first year you've had an action plan. The other thing that we've always emphasised, of course, is that over time, it's important to work towards, if you do have a strategic plan or some document that identifies your priorities, that might be just a maintenance plan, but if you have a broader plan where we start to organise the meeting agenda around those goals. We often default to a more traditional agenda, and there's much merit attached to that model. It's very thorough and systematic, beginning of conflicts of interest and working our way down and hearing certain reports and making certain decisions. But we have found it useful in some owners corporations where even the meeting agenda is something as simple and as practical as that, is reorganised around goals. So it compels the manager and all committee members to be focused on the future, that we're not just being retrospective and thinking about what we have done, but there's always a role for reporting and accountability. We have to reflect on what we have done, obviously, but sometimes when you work out the amount of time given to that versus the amount of time thinking about the issues in the here and now, as well as what we should be working on and achieving together, that can have a somewhat marginal status, and that's always a concern. So an action plan and organising the meeting agenda around the goals in your own strategic plan or some kind of broader document is a way of forcing us to be much more focused on the future and those opportunities.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, that's we've finished our conversation already. That's really very quick. Christine posted a note which is very important, and that was that it's important to publish that plan. So again, that's that open, transparent, that everyone can see what the initiatives are and what people are working on. It helps with that dysfunctional committee as well, and the OCs about understanding what it is they're trying to achieve. So again, thank you. And I'm going to take on the EV one. That's something we'll put on our list next year, and we'll bring someone into the conversation who can talk about that, because that is exactly one of those things on an action plan. It's a big strategic look as well for the building
retrofit, isn't it? Really?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot to consider when considering this. I'm just putting a whole lot together at the moment just around that. that subject. So it's a fascinating area. About how wide, if I think about Nick and extra stakeholders, about looking at a wider, beyond my community, what's within walking distance, what's, in other words, what's in the public realm, what's in, what are the expectations of my building, how do I compete with, I mean, not only, and is it only a step? I was going to say a hybrid step. Is it only a step? Because autonomous vehicles are around the corner. I mean, we won't even have parking. So,
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. Okay, a topic for next year.
Yes, exactly. It's on the list. Well, thank you again to the panel and everyone who came along this afternoon to listen. It's great to see you and sharing all your comments, and we'll see you at the next one, which we've got one more before Christmas. Yes, and it's reindeer antlers or Christmas hats or
something.
Flashing lights, something like that. And it's in December. I don't know the date, but I think it's the
18th, I think.
I was going to say it's that almost last week before Christmas. So, but just half an hour of your time. We'll see you then.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.